The following show is brought to you in part by support from Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi. We don't just practice law, we make history. Online at rkmc.com.
Hello and welcome. I'm delighted to introduce you tonight to my guest, former Governor Elmer Andersen. We're going to talk about his life and about leadership issues. It's wonderful to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. For those of you who are new to Minnesota, I want to tell you just a little bit about Governor Andersen's background. He started out, first job I believe, was selling newspapers on the streets at 3 cents a copy, and you had to pay 2 cents.
That's right.
And so there was a great profit of a penny a paper.
There was a big extra when the war ended, 1918, the First World War, and people would give you a nickel or a dime or some high rollers a quarter and say, "Keep the change, buddy." And that was a big day. There was only one extra that outsold the armistice of 1918, and no one has ever been able to guess what it was. But it was when Jack Dempsey knocked out Jess Willard.
So you made money on that fight.
I made money on that fight.
Besides selling papers, he has had many interesting and wonderful career steps. You were the president of H.B. Fuller Company, also chairman and CEO. You were a state senator from 1949 to 1958, and he was governor from 1961 until 1963. After that, you were president and chairman of the ECM Publishing Company and had a wonderful time, it sounds like, doing the paper and writing editorials.
Yes.
And you said that was perhaps the most rewarding job you had.
And there were 3 ambitions I had fairly early in life, apart from being in business and making a living. One was to have a farm, one was to have a weekly newspaper, and one was to serve in the legislature. And I was fortunate to be able to have all 3.
You did all 3. And not very many people would be able to say
I remember asking a postmaster of St. Paul, who was a dentist and had a dairy farm, what he thought of a businessman having a farm on the side. Oh, he said, "It's wonderful, Elmer. It'll take years off your life, and your family will love it. They'll learn things about life they learn in no other way." He said, "I hardly recommend it. It's the finest way to lose money you could choose."
And you jumped in and did it, didn't you?
And he was right.
When we think back, Elmer, to your early days, you had what I think a lot of people would say a really hard lot of challenges. Your parents separated when you were just a little boy. Your mother moved from Chicago to Muskegon. Your mother died when you were 16, your father shortly after, and a bit before that you had polio. And I read with kind of dismay how your classmates would sometimes push you down and struggle and laugh to watch, or you, as you struggled, they would laugh and sort of taunt you as you tried to get up. And I thought how cruel kids can be.
Kids can be cruel to one another, but they don't mean to be.
No.
They're thinking only of their own fun.
And kids are by nature self-oriented, I guess. Yes. But do you think, Elmer, all these challenges and hard times in a way helped you become a stronger person?
I think so. I think you learn to face vicissitudes with courage and confidence when you've had some hardship, so-called hardship. We never felt bad about our condition. We were a happy family. We lost our parents, but there were 4 of us, 2 older brothers and a younger sister, and we kept house together. I was chief cook and bottle washer for a while. I still remember baking a cake and leaving out the baking powder or something that caused the cake to rise. And it was flat and hard, and I could understand the family not being able to eat it. But when I threw it in the chicken coop and the chickens wouldn't eat it, I felt offended.
That was the last straw, huh? You had an Aunt Lily, too, that sounded like she influenced you a great deal in terms of introducing you to books or encouraging your
yes.
reading.
I had an aunt who was a school teacher, and we loved to go over to her home because she had books. And she had one set of books called Journeys Through Bookland. And I think that really instilled in me a love of reading and a love of books and wanting to have books in my own little library. And I started early with little red bordered stickers as a sign of ownership and kept records on the first books that I bought. And books have been an important part of my life always and still is.
And the wonderful recent honor of having the library at the university named after you must have been a thrill.
That regenerated my life because I began to think of collections they ought to have. I've always been very admiring of the Jewish community of Minnesota and what they've contributed. So I engineered the placing of the Upper Midwest Jewish Archive in the Andersen Library. And one of the great moments was the dedication of that. It meant so much to the Jewish community to have the recognition of their archive being part of the university library. And my closet friend, Gene McCarthy, would come to see me quite often, and I once asked him about his papers, and without a long story, they're now at the University of Minnesota.
Wonderful.
So I've had the fun of working at the library as well as having it named for me. I was overwhelmed when that happened.
That happened around the time of your 90th birthday, right?
90th birthday.
And can we tell people how old you are right now?
I'm 94, be 95 in June. And my dear wife is 92. She'll be 93 in March. And our next wedding anniversary will be our 72nd.
I was looking in the book and thought it would be in the early 70s.
We've had a wonderful life. Her parents were lovely people who became my parents, and they were so kind and generous and loving that it added a great deal to our own married life.
And I'm sure Eleanor loved that fact that you were so close to her parents. You were telling me you're 3/4 Norwegian.
3/4 Norwegian. My father was born in Norway. My mother was born in North Muskegon, Michigan, of a Norwegian mother and a Swedish father. So I'm 3/4 Norwegian. Eleanor's folks were both born in Sweden, so she's 100% Sweden. So that means our children are a little bit more Swedish than they are Norwegian, and I've learned to live with that.
When we think about leadership and you think about what the most important qualities are for good leadership, Elmer, what are the 2 or 3 things that come to the forefront of your mind?
Well, the main thing that comes to my mind is the desire and the enjoyment of helping other people. and you can do it in business and in every other way. Aid people in their own life fulfillment, and your own life gets fulfilled. I think that's the secret of it, is to be of service to other people. I could go on at length more specific about business philosophy, but that's the heart of the matter, is that whatever association you have, try to make it a little better for the people you meet than if they hadn't met you, or if they work for you, that they have some fulfillment of their own life by growth, education, something.
So they become then, if you can do that, which is a challenge, they obviously would become very loyal to you and to the causes that you're working on together.
That's the way to build a business. The first priority in a business should be service to the customer. The second priority should be service to the people associated in the enterprise. Stockholders invest money, but workers invest their lives, and they're entitled to priority over money. I think there's altogether too much emphasis on money and greed and arrogance. I never approached leadership as a leader. I never thought of myself as a leader. I wanted to be a useful, honest, fair-minded, decent citizen. And that's all I've ever wanted to be.
Even when you were a state senator or governor, you didn't really say, I feel like a leader?
No, I felt like a servant. I'd get up in the morning early, and the first thing would be report of the highway fatalities. And it'd be a personal shock that some of the people of the state had lost their lives overnight. I think concern for service is the key thing. Dwelling on leadership can lead to arrogance, and I think we're seeing a little too much of it in politics these days.
You share that servant concept of leadership with the late Jim Shannon. He loved that philosophy and that concept too, didn't he?
He was a fine man. I knew him well.
As a leader, Elmer, you've been so optimistic throughout good times and bad. And did you find that some of the people that you worked with were saying to you or saying behind your back, that Elmer is kind of a Pollyanna? Did you get that reaction ever?
I remember once we plotted our company's growth, fuller growth, of 15% a month, a year, which would double in 5 years. And we kept doing that until it was getting quite big. And at one Christmas party, I said, if we're going to maintain our schedule of growth, we're going to have to act like we believe it. And that means more plants, more land, more investment on a big scale, because the numbers are getting bigger. And we became a Fortune 500 company. And I heard after that party that someone said to somebody, Elmer's been smoking that stuff again.
I have to ask you, when you look at your career and various careers, what do you think was your greatest, most difficult challenge, Elmer?
Well, I think the most difficult challenge is keeping a balance in life, to be loyal to your family and give them the attention and support and love that they need, and to, if you're in business, to do well in business, and to save some time for public service in the broader scene, and to keep a proper balance between everything, I think is the biggest challenge in life. It's so easy to get carried away by an enthusiasm of one kind or another and neglect a part of your life. To have a well-rounded, balanced loving life is a great achievement, I think.
Do you think, Eleanor, your wife would agree that you kept that balance?
I think she thinks I've been a little too busy sometimes. I had a good friend, Ed Devitt, who is a federal judge in Minnesota for years, and he used to write me notes. He said, Elmer, I think you've done enough now. You should take it a little easier. And then some challenge comes along. And I'd talk it over with Eleanor, and she'd frequently say, do we have to decide that right now? But she's been very supportive in all activities.
I have to quickly ask you to comment on the recount experience, because a lot of people are still remembering that and what a close race it was when you and Karl Rovag waited those 4.5 months to see who would become governor. And it ended up that he got 91 more votes than you did.
Yes.
You sounded in the book, Elmer, like you didn't let that make you depressed or bitter.
We always look, in anything that happens, look for an opportunity. And I think in any mishap that occurs to anybody, there's always opportunity for an advantage. I went home from that and I said, well, we're out of work. We're off the governorship. Let's put the family together and go on a trip. So we had a wonderful family trip to Europe that we might not have had otherwise.
And
we
all the
visited
kids
Norway
went,
and Sweden, and were on the fjords, and went to France and Italy, and wound up in England, and had a wonderful time, and came home on the Queen Mary. And we really had a wonderful time and enjoyed each other's company so much. I think it almost made the family glad I was defeated.
In your book that I've just loved reading, A Man's Grasp.
A man's reach.
A Man's Reach, yes,
should exceed his grasp.
I'm botching up the title here. This is the cover. It's based on Robert Browning's wonderful quote. Can you give us the whole quote?
A man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? It was written by Robert Browning in a poem, Andrea del Sarto.
Yes.
But I learned that line in junior college by an ardent English teacher whom I'll never forget. And I've thought about that line over and over again. A man's reach should exceed his grasp. It says something to me that's important, and I've loved it ever since.
Used it as inspiration. In the book, there are some wonderful philosophical sections that I was very excited reading. And I'd like to just have you comment on a few of them that I think are representative of you, I think, Elmer. One comes very early in the book, and you write, I have come to think that the greatest force in life is love, not sexual love, but love of humanity. If people will believe in the power of love and let it work, it can do wonders. That philosophy has been at the core of all of my efforts in business and government.
Love, in that sense, is religious and spiritual. It's love of all humanity and a wish that everybody can enjoy a full life, and a willingness to do something, however small, wherever you are, with whatever opportunity you have, everyone can do something. I remember a man named Carl Schunemann, who was head of Schunemann's store in St. Paul, and he did a lot of good work, and when he left the city, he went to Florida to live. And I wrote him a letter saying, Carl, just as one citizen of St. Paul, I want to thank you for the opportunity you've given to young women of color to improve their position in life by becoming salespeople in your fine store. And I just think you've done a wonderful work. Words to that effect. A couple of years later, his son came up to me at a Rotary meeting. He said, Elmer, I suppose you've read that Dad died the other day in Florida. I said, yes, I did. He said, you know, we went over his personal effects, the thing he had in his pocket, and he had a copy of your letter. Just a little letter prompted him to feel that he had done something worthy, and he kept that little symbol of his work all that time. Wow. It's just an illustration that anybody, everybody, at every opportunity can do something to improve the life of the people you encounter.
And you probably didn't think of it as a big gesture. You just dashed it off and sent it.
Just dashed it off as a casual thing.
I think we all need and love to get thank yous and appreciation.
Yes.
When you think of all the honors you've gotten, which one kind of made you the most proud or made you just sort of burst with that inner happiness?
Well, I think I was most pleased with two events. One was being elected to the state Senate. I enjoyed the 10 years there very much and was so appreciative of St. Anthony Park, who gave me the big vote that made the difference in my election. And then I was chairman of an interim commission that studied for 2 years the problems of children with disabilities, and we inaugurated legislation in 1957 that put Minnesota in the forefront of the states doing anything for children with disabilities, to see that whatever attributes they had should be fully developed. And we passed all the legislation needed, and Minnesota became outstanding, so families would move here so their children with disabilities could have the benefit of our special education program. That, to me, was a real accomplishment, and I appreciate it. It isn't much noticed. The part I played in establishing Voyageurs National Park is more spectacular, but more satisfying with special education for those who could use it.
I have one more quote I want you to comment on from your book, and it's about aging, Elmer, and I think a lot of people, including my friend Gisa, would say, aging is not a good thing, Mary. It's very, very hard. But you have a positive take on it, and I'll just read a sentence here from the book. You said, my philosophy has always been to look for a good side to every development. I think age has made me even more adaptable. I am better able to accept what comes and be satisfied with conditions as they are. And you talk about shifting from activity to thought.
Well, one thing that affected my life considerably was macular degeneration, so that I can't read. But it provided an opportunity for my wife to read aloud, so every night she reads aloud. And by reading 15, 20 minutes or a half hour a day, we go through all kinds of books.
So books are still with you. You've just adapted.
And then there are tapes. There's Newsweek tape. I get a tape of Newsweek. The last thing at night I have tapes. I've been listening to a course on tape on the history of the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and there's an abundance of material to balance anything that happens. We live in such a wonderful age of technology and medical help and technology of all kinds, that if you can afford it, there's everything, and everybody should afford it. Those who can't afford it privately should be given it publicly. I think the great goal of any true society should be the lifting of everyone to a satisfactory level of life.
That's a very progressive philosophy, isn't it, that
Yes.
has kind of guided you, it seems, throughout your whole career.
I'm not a low-tax person. I'm not for tax cuts. I'm for joining hands for the public good. And people of modest income are bamboozled when they think that tax cuts benefit them, because in a progressive tax system, those who have more pay more, and those who have less pay less, but they enjoy the benefits just as much. The good highway system, the national parks, the public health, all the things that come from taxes are a bargain for those of moderate and low income, and they shouldn't be led foolishly to support tax cuts that benefit the rich so far greater than the poor. I feel that the taxes people pay in Minnesota are the best investment they make. I spent 10 years in the Senate, was privileged to be governor, and was active in party political matters and social matters and educational matters. I've known Minnesota for more years than most people and in an active life, and I'm convinced that the money people spend on taxation in Minnesota is the best investment they make.
We are out of time, Elmer, but I would like to ask you if we could say the one thing we know together in Norwegian for the audience. If there are any Norwegians who know this, you'll enjoy it. It's
Jesunaven,
Jesunaven går vi til bord, a spika dricka pordi ord, good to learn, as to govern, so får vi mat, Jesunaven.
Amen.
This is a very familiar table prayer that we share.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you so much for
thank you for the
sharing
opportunity.
Your ideas and more about your wonderful life. I've enjoyed getting to know you better.
Well, life is wonderful, and it should be lived to the full. And when opportunities come, people shouldn't deny them. They should take the opportunity by the hand and go forward.
Not be afraid.
Not be afraid.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us. We'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.